breaking news tonight, a deeply divided moment playing out in American history as we come on the air. President Trump has just been impeached on both Article 1, abuse of power, and on Article 2, obstruction of Congress. The votes down party lines as predicted. And all day long here, we've been watching the short bursts of anger, the closing arguments from both sides. Democrats arguing the evidence was clear, arguing the president used the power of his office for personal and political gain with this election coming.
Okay, so the Trump legal team just got absolutely destroyed in court. And this is not some procedural footnote that gets buried on page 12 of the legal filings. This is a federal judge forcing members of Trump's own inner circle to testify under oath in a case that was already moving toward conviction, and the implications here are massive. Now we're talking about a ruling that strips away one of the last protective barriers Trump's lawyers have been desperately trying to maintain, and it's happening at exactly the moment when the former president can least afford another legal catastrophe. This isn't just about one case anymore. This is about whether the walls are finally closing in on Trump in a way that even his most loyal allies can't spin away, and whether the judiciary is sending a signal that no one, not even a former president, not even his closest advisors, is above the law when it comes to answering questions under oath about potential criminal conduct. The judge's decision came down hard, it came down fast, and it came down in a way that legal experts are already calling a turning point in this entire saga. Now, before we get into the details of what just happened and why this could be the beginning of the end for Trump's legal strategy in this case, let's talk about something important. You're watching this right now because you want the truth. You want to understand what's really going on behind the headlines. And let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. They're either sanitizing the story to protect Trump, or they're so focused on the spectacle that they miss the substance. That's why we built Politic Insane, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. We bring the news straight to you every single day. Just hit the subscribe button below to join us. And if you want to support this work and be part of a community that truly cares about the truth, this is your moment. Subscribe. All right, let's get back to the video. Here's what happened. A federal judge overseeing one of the criminal cases against Donald Trump issued a ruling that legal observers are calling a bombshell, and the core of it is this. Several members of Trump's legal team and inner circle are now compelled to testify under oath about conversations, strategy sessions, and actions they took during the period when Trump is alleged to have committed crimes. The judge didn't just suggest they testify. The judge ordered it, rejecting every single argument Trump's lawyers made about attorney-client privilege, executive privilege, and work product protection. The ruling is dozens of pages long, and it systematically dismantles each of the legal shields that Trump's team tried to hide behind. What makes this so devastating is that these aren't peripheral figures. These are people who were in the room when decisions were made, people who heard Trump's instructions directly, people who saw documents, who participated in meetings, who know exactly what Trump knew and when he knew it. And now they're going to have to talk about it under oath in front of a grand jury or at trial. And if they lie, they're facing perjury charges themselves. The judge made it very clear in the ruling that attorney-client privilege does not protect communications that were made in furtherance of a crime, and that executive privilege does not apply when the former president is the subject of a criminal investigation into his own conduct. This is the crime fraud exception in action, and the judge found that prosecutors had presented enough evidence to show that Trump and his lawyers may have crossed the line from legal advocacy into criminal conspiracy. The timing here is brutal for Trump. This case was already moving forward aggressively, with prosecutors signaling they have significant evidence of obstruction, witness tampering, and potentially conspiracy to defraud the United States. The grand jury has been hearing testimony for months, and insiders say the evidence is overwhelming. But Trump's legal strategy has always been to delay, to obfuscate, to claim privilege over everything, and to keep his inner circle from having to testify about what really happened. That strategy just collapsed. The judge's ruling means that the prosecution is about to get access to testimony that could directly contradict the public statements Trump and his lawyers have been making for months. It means the jury is going to hear from people who were there, who saw the documents being moved, who heard the conversations about how to respond to subpoenas, who participated in the meetings where Trump allegedly decided to ignore court orders and hide evidence. And here's the thing, these witnesses can't plead the Fifth if they're given immunity, which prosecutors are almost certainly prepared to offer. So even if some of these people want to protect Trump, they're not going to have a choice. They either testify truthfully or they go to prison for contempt or perjury. Now, let's talk about what led to this moment, because this didn't happen in a vacuum. The case in question involves allegations that Trump illegally retained classified documents after leaving office, obstructed justice by refusing to return them, ordered his staff to hide documents from federal investigators, and then lied to his own lawyers about what he had and where it was. Federal prosecutors have been building this case for over a year, and they have security footage, they have text messages, they have emails, and they have testimony from staffers who were directly involved in moving boxes of documents around Mar-a-Lago to keep them away from investigators. Trump's defense has been a mix of claiming he had the right to keep the documents, that he declassified everything, that the FBI raid was illegal, and that his lawyers didn't know what they were talking about. But as the case has progressed, it's become increasingly clear that Trump knew exactly what he had, that he was told repeatedly by his lawyers that he had to return the documents, and that he deliberately chose to defy subpoenas and court orders because he believed he was above the law. The key legal question that the judge had to decide was whether Trump's conversations with his lawyers were protected by attorney-client privilege. Normally, those conversations are sacred. A lawyer can't be forced to testify about what their client told them, and that's a bedrock principle of the legal system. But there's an exception, and it's a big one. If the client is using the lawyer to commit or cover up a crime, the privilege doesn't apply. This is called the crime-fraud exception, and it's been part of American law for over a century. The idea is simple. You can't use your lawyer as a shield to commit crimes. If you're asking your lawyer to help you destroy evidence, or if you're lying to your lawyer to get them to make false statements to investigators, or if you're using the lawyer as a conduit to coordinate a cover-up, then those communications aren't privileged, and that's exactly what the judge found here. The ruling states that prosecutors presented sufficient evidence to demonstrate that Trump was not seeking legal advice in good faith, but was instead attempting to use his attorneys to obstruct the investigation and conceal his possession of classified materials. The judge noted that Trump allegedly made false statements to his own lawyers, knowing they would then repeat those false statements to federal investigators, and that this conduct falls squarely within the crime-fraud exception. This is where it gets really bad for Trump, because the judge didn't just rule on one or two conversations. The judge ruled that a wide range of communications between Trump and his legal team are not protected, which means prosecutors can now ask about strategy sessions, about what Trump told his lawyers regarding the documents, about whether Trump instructed his lawyers to make certain arguments knowing they were false, and about whether Trump was coordinating with his lawyers to delay and obstruct the investigation. And here's the problem. If Trump's lawyers testify that he lied to them, or that he instructed them to make false statements, or that he told them to ignore subpoenas, that's game over. That's direct evidence of obstruction, of conspiracy, and potentially of perjury if Trump later made statements under oath that contradicted what he told his lawyers privately. Legal experts are already saying that this ruling could be the single most damaging development in any of the criminal cases against Trump, because it opens the door to testimony that would be nearly impossible for the defense to counter. But there's another layer to this that makes it even more significant, and that's the precedent it sets. This is a federal judge telling the world that being a former president does not insulate you from criminal investigation, that hiring expensive lawyers does not give you a license to commit crimes, and that the normal rules of attorney-client privilege do not apply when you're using your lawyers to further criminal conduct. This is the judiciary pushing back hard against the idea that Trump is somehow untouchable, and it's happening in real time as Trump is ramping up his 2024 presidential campaign. The political implications are staggering, because Trump's entire strategy has been to run for president while claiming that all of these prosecutions are politically motivated witch hunts. But when a federal judge looks at the evidence and says that there's enough here to pierce attorney-client privilege, that's not a witch hunt. That's a serious criminal case with serious evidence, and it's being taken seriously by the courts. Let's break down what this actually means, because there are multiple dimensions here that we need to unpack. First, understand that this ruling doesn't just affect this one case. The precedent it sets could apply to other cases Trump is facing, both at the federal level and at the state level. If prosecutors in other jurisdictions can show that Trump used his lawyers to further criminal schemes, they can now point to this ruling and argue that the same exception should apply. So, this could open the door to similar rulings in the New York case involving hush money payments, in the Georgia case involving election interference, and in the federal January 6th case.
Trump's entire legal strategy has been built on the idea that his lawyers can serve as a buffer between him and investigators, but if that buffer is gone, if his lawyers can be compelled to testify, then the entire strategy collapses. Second, think about the impact this has on Trump's legal team going forward. No competent lawyer wants to be in a position where they might be forced to testify against their own client. It puts the lawyer in an impossible ethical situation, and it exposes the lawyer to potential legal jeopardy if they participated in any conduct that could be construed as obstruction. So, what you're likely going to see now is a wave of lawyers either withdrawing from Trump's cases or refusing to take him on as a client because the risk is just too high. And that's already happening. Trump has gone through multiple legal teams in the past 2 years. And part of the reason is that reputable law firms don't want to touch him because they know there's a good chance they'll end up as witnesses or even as targets themselves. This ruling is going to accelerate that trend, and it's going to make it even harder for Trump to find competent legal representation. And when you can't find good lawyers, your chances of winning in court drop dramatically. Third, consider the political ramifications heading into 2026 and beyond. Trump is running for president in 2024, and he's doing it while facing multiple criminal indictments. His strategy has been to claim that he's being persecuted by the Biden administration and the deep state, and to rally his base around the idea that he's a victim of a corrupt system. But when a federal judge issues a ruling like this, backed by dozens of pages of legal reasoning and evidence, it becomes a lot harder to sell that narrative to anyone outside of Trump's core supporters. Moderate Republicans, independents, swing voters, these are people who might be willing to give Trump the benefit of the doubt if they think the prosecutions are politically motivated, but they're not going to ignore a ruling that says Trump was using his lawyers to commit crimes. This is the kind of thing that could tank Trump's poll numbers with general election voters, and it's the kind of thing that gives Democrats a massive amount of ammunition heading into the midterms and into 2024. Every Democratic candidate in every competitive race is going to be able to point to this ruling and say, look, a federal judge found that Trump was using his lawyers to cover up crimes. Do you really want to vote for someone who's going to bring that kind of chaos back to the White House? Fourth, think about what this means for the actual trial. If Trump's lawyers are forced to testify, and if they testify that Trump lied to them or that he instructed them to obstruct the investigation, the prosecution's case becomes exponentially stronger. Juries are skeptical of circumstantial evidence, but they're very responsive to direct testimony from credible witnesses. And Trump's own lawyers, especially if they're testifying under a grant of immunity, are going to be seen as highly credible. Like they have no incentive to lie at that point because lying would mean going to prison, and they have every detail of what happened because they were in the room. So the prosecution is going to be able to present a narrative that is detailed, specific, and backed by people who were there. That's devastating for the defense because the defense strategy is usually to create reasonable doubt by poking holes in the prosecution's case. But if the prosecution has Trump's own lawyers testifying against him, there's no reasonable doubt left. The jury is going to hear directly from people Trump trusted, people he confided in, and those people are going to say he knew what he was doing was illegal and he did it anyway. Fifth, and this is critical, think about the message this sends to other potential witnesses. There are dozens of people who worked for Trump, who were in meetings with him, who saw things happen, and who have been reluctant to come forward because they're afraid of retaliation or because they feel some sense of loyalty to Trump. But when a federal judge issues a ruling like this, it sends a very clear message. If you have information about criminal conduct, you're going to be compelled to share it. And if you try to hide behind privilege or loyalty, you're going to end up in legal jeopardy yourself. So what you're likely going to see now is a flood of cooperation from people who were on the fence, people who were waiting to see which way the wind was blowing. This ruling is the wind, and it's blowing in one direction, toward accountability. Now let's zoom out and talk about the broader institutional and constitutional implications, because this is about more than just one case or one defendant. This is about whether the American legal system can hold a former president accountable for criminal conduct, and whether the courts are willing to stand up to political pressure and apply the law equally. For the past several years, there's been a growing sense that Trump operates in a different legal universe than the rest of us, that he can do things that would land anyone else in prison and somehow walk away unscathed. He's been impeached twice, he's been investigated by Congress, by state prosecutors, by federal prosecutors, by special counsels, and yet he's never faced serious consequences. He's never been convicted. He's never been disqualified from office. He's never even really been slowed down. And a lot of people, both his supporters and his critics, have started to believe that maybe he really is untouchable, that maybe the system just isn't capable of holding someone like him accountable. This ruling is the judiciary saying, no, that's not how this works. The rule of law applies to everyone, including former presidents, including billionaires, including people who have millions of loyal supporters. And if you commit crimes, you're going to face the consequences no matter how powerful you are, no matter how loudly you scream about witch hunts and deep state conspiracies. This is the system working the way it's supposed to work, and it's working because judges are willing to make hard decisions based on the evidence and the law, not based on politics or public opinion or fear of backlash. And that's incredibly important because if this ruling had gone the other way, if the judge had allowed Trump to hide behind attorney-client privilege, even when there was evidence that he was using his lawyers to commit crimes, it would have set a horrific precedent. It would have told every future president, every politician, every powerful person that you can use your lawyers as a shield to commit whatever crimes you want, and as long as you're clever about it, you'll never face consequences. That's not a legal system, that's a protection racket for the rich and powerful. But the judge didn't do that. The judge looked at the evidence, applied the law, and ruled that Trump has to face the same consequences as anyone else, and that's a big deal, not just for this case, but for the future of American democracy. Because if we can't hold former presidents accountable for criminal conduct, then we don't really have a democracy. We have an elected monarchy where the president can do whatever they want while in office and then walk away without ever answering for it. And that's not what the founders intended. That's not what the Constitution says. And that's not what the American people deserve. So here's the bottom line. A federal judge just forced Trump's legal team to testify in a criminal case that was already moving toward conviction. And this is a massive, potentially fatal blow to Trump's defense strategy. The ruling strips away the protections of attorney-client privilege, it opens the door to testimony that could directly incriminate Trump, and it sends a clear signal that the courts are not going to let Trump hide behind legal technicalities to avoid accountability. The political implications are enormous, because this undermines Trump's narrative that he's being persecuted and gives his opponents powerful evidence that he committed serious crimes. The legal implications are even bigger because this could set a precedent that applies to other cases, and that makes it much harder for powerful people to use their lawyers to commit crimes. And the institutional implications are the biggest of all, because this is the judiciary standing up and saying that no one is above the law, not even a former president. Over the next few weeks, watch how Trump's legal team responds to this ruling. They're almost certainly going to appeal, and they're going to try to get a stay that prevents the testimony from happening until the appeals process plays out. But appeals take time, and the clock is ticking on this case. The trial is scheduled to begin in a matter of months, and if Trump can't delay it, he's going to have to go to trial with his own lawyers, potentially testifying against him. Watch how Republican leaders respond to this ruling. So far, most of them have been willing to give Trump the benefit of the doubt and to echo his claims about witch hunts, but a ruling like this makes that position a lot harder to defend. You're going to see some Republicans start to distance themselves from Trump, especially those who are worried about their own re-election prospects in swing districts. And watch how the media covers this. The mainstream press has been hesitant to call this what it is, which is a former president facing serious criminal charges with serious evidence behind them, but a ruling like this makes it impossible to ignore. This is a turning point not just in this case, but in the entire story of Trump's legal jeopardy and his political future. The walls are closing in, the courts are not backing down, and the evidence is mounting. This story is far from over, but the trajectory is becoming very clear. Keep your eyes on this because what happens next could define American politics and American law for a generation. O Cláudio pode cometer erros. Confira sempre as respostas.